The sound of the barcode scanner was the only music I had heard for 8 hours straight. A sharp beep that seemed to pierce my eardrums and lodge itself right in the center of my headache. My feet throbbed inside my cheap, worn-out sneakers, and I could smell the scent of bleach and cold sweat that seemed to emanate from my blue polyester uniform. It was a rainy Wednesday in Seattle, and the supermarket had that humid, stuffy air that made everyone irritable, including me, who just wanted to get home and sleep. I scanned a package of pasta, 2 jars of tomato sauce, and a bottle of cheap wine without even looking at the customer's face. Mechanized by exhaustion, and the humiliating routine of someone who once dreamed of building skyscrapers and now only bagged other people's food. My spine protested when I leaned over to grab a bag of oranges that the previous elderly lady had left almost falling off the conveyor belt, and I held back a groan of pain, adjusting my posture while trying to maintain the professional smile the manager demanded. The next customer placed their groceries on the belt with a delicacy that was uncommon around there, depositing items that cost more than my entire salary for the month. Imported cheeses, French wines, Swiss chocolates. The smell arrived before the sight. A perfume of wood and white flowers, sophisticated and expensive, which cut through the stale air of the market like a sharp blade and made me look up involuntarily. My heart skipped a beat, stopped for a whole second, and then started beating out of rhythm, banging against my ribs like a bird trapped in a cage that was too small. There she was, standing on the other side of the register, with the impeccable posture of an exiled queen among commoners, wearing a perfectly cut beige trench coat that probably cost more than the rent of the house I lived in. Caroline had not changed at all in the 3 years since I had fled my internship at the construction firm, except perhaps for the fine lines of tiredness around her brown eyes that were now staring at me with a sharp curiosity. I froze with a can of truffle oil in my hand, feeling the heat rise up my neck and set my cheeks on fire, praying that she wouldn't recognize me, that I would be just another invisible cashier. But fate, with its cruel sense of humor, would not give me that truce, and I saw the exact moment when recognition shone in those intelligent, cold eyes. She tilted her head slightly to the side, a gesture I had seen 1,000 times in site meetings when she analyzed a complicated blueprint, and her lips parted in an expression that mixed surprise and something I couldn't decipher. The silence between us lasted an eternity, broken only by the beep of the register next to us, and the distant buzz of people complaining about the rain outside. I wanted to disappear, sink into the dirty floor of the supermarket, and emerge anywhere else in the world, far from that analytical gaze that seemed to strip my soul and see all my failure. My hands shook when I tried to pass the oil through the scanner, and the beep sounded too loud, like an alarm announcing my shame to the whole establishment. Luna! Her voice sounded deep and velvety, pronouncing my name with a familiarity that sent a shiver down my spine, transforming that question into a death sentence for my pride. I had no choice but to face her, forcing a smile that must have looked more like a grimace of pain, while trying to hide my rough hands with fingernails cut too short. "Yes, Ms. Caroline," I replied with a failing voice, hating the automatic subservience that took over me, hating even more calling her Ms. when she was only 14 years older than me. She didn't smile, just continued watching me with that disconcerting intensity, her eyes sweeping over my uniform, my crooked name tag, and returning to my tired face with no makeup. "I thought you had moved to San Francisco to finish architecture school," she said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact that didn't fit into the mental spreadsheet she must keep of all former employees. The mention of the degree I had to abandon when my mother got sick was like a knife to the chest, reopening a wound I tried to ignore every day when I woke up. "Things changed a little," I murmured, scanning the rest of her groceries as fast as I could, wanting to end that painful interaction before I started crying right there. The total amount of the purchase appeared on the screen, an obscene sum, and she extended a black credit card without even blinking, while I avoided looking at her, focusing only on the card machine. While the receipt was printing, with that dragging and annoying noise, I felt that she hadn't moved, that she remained standing there, blocking the line, blocking my escape, blocking my air. "What time do you get off, Luna?" she asked suddenly. And the tone wasn't of someone asking for information, but of someone used to giving orders and being obeyed without question. I looked at the clock on the wall, which marked almost 8 o'clock at night, and swallowed hard, not understanding why the construction manager of one of the biggest development firms in the city would be interested in my clock-out time. "In 10 minutes, I replied, handing the card back to her and feeling the cold touch of her fingers brush against mine for a brief second. "Great," she said, putting the card in her leather wallet with elegant and precise movements, completely ignoring the gentleman behind her who sighed impatiently at the delay. "There is a coffee shop across the street that stays open late. I will wait for you there so we can talk a little. I won't take no for an answer." I opened my mouth to invent an excuse, to say that I needed to run home, that my mother was waiting for me, that I had neither the clothes nor the dignity to sit in a coffee shop with her. But Caroline was already gathering the bags with impressive ease for someone in high heels and turning her back, her perfume leaving a trail of promises and danger in the air. I watched her walk away toward the exit, the beige coat swaying with the movement of her hips, and felt a mixture of panic and curiosity churn my empty stomach. The rest of the 10 minutes dragged on, as if time had turned into molasses, every second dripping slowly while my mind created 1,000 catastrophic scenarios for that unusual invitation. Had I made some grave mistake back during the internship, and she only discovered it now, coming to charge me or sue me for some forgotten failure? Or did she feel pity? That disgusting pity that rich people feel when they see someone who had potential waiting tables or bagging groceries and wanted to offer me a handout? When I finally punched out, feeling the physical relief of getting rid of the workstation, I ran to the employee bathroom and tried to fix my rebellious hair that had come loose from my loose bun. I washed my face with cold tap water, trying to remove the shine of oiliness and fatigue, but the deep, dark circles remained there, denouncing my poorly slept nights and my financial worries. I took off the blue vest in a hurry, staying in my basic white t-shirt and faded jeans, feeling naked and vulnerable without the protection of the uniform, just the failed Luna before the successful woman. I took 3 deep breaths, looking at my reflection in the spotted mirror, and told myself it was just a coffee, that I could handle 15 minutes of polite conversation and then disappear forever. The rain had slowed to a fine drizzle when I left through the back door and walked around the block to the coffee shop, seeing through the illuminated window the unmistakable silhouette of Caroline sitting at a corner table. She looked out of place there, too elegant for the simple wooden chairs and the modest environment, reading something on her cell phone with her brow furrowed in concentration. My instincts screamed for me to turn around and run to the bus stop, flee to the safety of my known poverty, far from that woman who represented everything I wanted to be and failed to achieve. But my feet, betraying my common sense and moved by a gravitational force I couldn't explain, took me inside the establishment, straight to her table. Caroline looked up as soon as I approached, and for an instant, I saw the mask of coldness fall, revealing a deep exhaustion that mirrored mine, a loneliness that not even all her money seemed capable of curing. "Sit down, Luna," she said softly, indicating the chair across from her, and there was already a steaming cup of cappuccino waiting for me, as if she knew exactly what I needed. I sat on the edge of the chair, tense, ready to run at any moment, and waited for the blow, the humiliation, or the pity. But what she said next, with a low and controlled voice, was the last thing I expected to hear on that rainy night, or in any other life. "I need a favor from you," she began, and her eyes locked onto mine with a desperate intensity. "A favor that can change your life and save mine." The smell of roasted beans and steamed milk invaded my nostrils, creating an absurd contrast with the odor of bleach that still seemed stuck to my skin. The waitress placed the cup in front of me with a tired smile, and I wrapped the hot porcelain with both hands, seeking any kind of warmth that could calm the involuntary trembling of my fingers. Caroline didn't touch her drink, keeping her perfectly manicured hands clasped on the rustic wooden table, observing me with that same surgical precision of someone evaluating the structure of a building about to collapse. The sound of rain hitting the coffee shop window seemed to create an acoustic bubble around us, isolating our conversation from the rest of the world and increasing the sensation that I was about to enter dangerous territory. "You were always very discreet, Luna," she began, her voice firm, but with a tone slightly lower than usual, as if she were confessing a state secret. "I remember that. During the internship, you heard everything that happened in the conference room, saw the partners fighting, but never opened your mouth to gossip in the hallways. And that silent loyalty is a rare currency in our market." I frowned, confused by the sudden compliment coming from someone who barely seemed to notice my existence 3 years ago, except to correct my technical drawings. I thanked her with a brief nod, still waiting for the catch, the bill, or the bad news that would certainly come next. "I didn't call you here to offer you a job at the firm, at least not the kind of job you imagine," she continued, and I saw her eyes drift to the window for 1,000th of a second, revealing an insecurity that didn't match the posture of the Iron Lady. "My family, as you must remember, is extremely traditional, the kind that still lives in the last century, and believes that a single woman of 38 is fundamentally a systemic failure. The board of directors will vote for the new president of the company next month, and my uncle, a man who thinks a woman's place is decorating the living room, is using my personal instability as an argument to take me out of the game." I felt a bitter taste in my mouth that had nothing to do with the coffee, indignation rising in my throat at the injustice she described, but still not understanding where I, the broke ex-intern, fit into that dispute of millionaires. "They want a family image, Luna. An emotional anchor that proves I am reliable, stable, and traditional enough to manage the heritage of generations." She paused dramatically, returning to stare at me with an intensity that made my stomach turn. "I need a fiancé. Someone willing to play a role for 1 year, wear a ring, smile at charity dinners, and shut that sexist old man's mouth." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of the espresso machine in the background, while my brain tried to process the absurdity of those words. I let out a nervous laugh, thinking it was some kind of cruel psychological test or a joke in very bad taste, but Caroline's face remained impassive, without any trace of humor. "You are asking me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" I asked, my voice coming out an octave higher than normal. Feeling the ridicule of the situation hit me like a slap. "Not girlfriend," she corrected coldly, leaning forward like a predator. "Wife." I recoiled in the chair as if I had received a physical shock, looking at that elegant and desperate woman, trying to find some sign of madness in her eyes, but only found calculation and pragmatism. "Why me?" I whispered, feeling the weight of my own insignificance. After all, she could hire an actress, a model, anyone from her social circle who knew how to behave and dress. "Because you need money as much as I need this position," she replied bluntly, hitting my weak point with the precision of a sniper. "I saw how you looked at the total of my purchase today. I saw the wear on your sneakers, and I know you dropped out of college for lack of payment, not lack of talent." That raw truth hurt more than any insult, exposing my financial vulnerability in a humiliating way. But she didn't stop there, putting the cards on the table with brutal objectivity. "The proposal is simple. We pay off all your current debts, pay for your mother's treatment if that is the case, and I fund your architecture degree until the end, in exchange for 1 year of your life. You live in my house, accompany me to social events, and we convince the world that we are in love. After 12 months, we divorce amicably. You leave with your diploma and a generous amount to restart your life wherever you want, and I keep my company. My mind spun, oscillating between the moral offense of being bought and the desperate relief the offer represented, imagining what it would be like to sleep without the worry of being evicted or not having enough to eat. But what about the rules? I asked, trying to keep a drop of rationality in the middle of chaos, knowing that nothing in that world came for free or without fine print. It is a business contract, Luna. Nothing more, she said, and her voice took on an icy tone that erected an invisible barrier between us. No physical intimacy beyond strictly necessary in public, separate bedrooms, separate lives inside the house, and most importantly, no real feelings, because I have neither the time nor the patience for romantic dramas. I looked at my calloused hands holding the cup, thinking about all the nights I cried from exhaustion, all the humiliations I swallowed at the supermarket checkout, and the dream of being an architect that I had buried along with my dignity. It was a sale of my soul. I knew that. An emotional prostitution that would turn me into a luxury commodity on her shelf. But the alternative was to continue sinking slowly into the quicksand of poverty. And if they find out? I asked, fear making my heart race, imagining the scandals, the newspapers, the public shame if the farce were revealed. No one will find out if you are as good an actress as you were a good intern, she countered, challenging my pride. Caroline took a brown envelope from her leather purse and slid it across the table until it stopped in front of me, a physical and heavy object that contained the destiny of my next year. Here is the pre-contract with all the clauses and values. You can read it calmly, but I need your answer by tomorrow at noon. She stood up, adjusting her coat with that annoying elegance, and left a $100 bill on the table to pay for 2 coffees, a gesture that perfectly summarized the disparity between our worlds. Don't disappoint me, Luna, she said before turning around, and I stayed there, alone, staring at the envelope as if it were a time bomb. I took the paper with trembling hands, feeling the thick texture of the envelope, and looked outside, where the rain continued to fall over Seattle, washing the streets but not my conscience. I knew, in the pit of my churning stomach, that I had already accepted the moment she mentioned college, because the hunger for a future was greater than my present pride. I put the envelope inside my worn backpack, protecting it from the rain and curious glances, and stood up, feeling a new weight on my shoulders, the weight of a lie I would have to carry. I left the coffee shop and walked to the bus stop, but the city seemed different now. The lights of the tall buildings didn't seem so distant anymore. They seemed like a scenery that was about to swallow me. I arrived home soaked and exhausted, and threw the envelope on the wobbly kitchen table, the only furniture I had besides the bed and the stove. I stared at it for hours, while the sound of the neighbor's television leaked through the thin wall, thinking about the irony of having to pretend love for the woman who represented everything I feared and admired. Tomorrow I would cease to be Luna, the supermarket cashier, to become the heiress's fiancé. And I didn't know if I was saving my life or signing my sentence of loneliness. I fell asleep to the sound of rain, and Caroline's cold face etched in my mind, not knowing that contract would be the easiest and hardest thing I would ever sign. The elevator rose 30 floors in a matter of seconds, but my stomach seemed to have stayed on the ground floor, churning with anxiety at every floor that flashed on the digital panel. When the brushed steel doors opened directly into the living room, the air conditioning hit me with a cold blow, bringing that same smell of white flowers and excessive cleanliness I had felt at the coffee shop, only now raised to the 10th power. I was holding my single rolling suitcase, which made an embarrassing noise of plastic scratching the white marble floor, a sound that echoed through the vastness of that room as if I were dragging a corpse. Caroline was standing in the center of the room, with a glass of wine in her hand and bare feet, looking much smaller there inside than she seemed at the construction firm, swallowed by the double-height ceiling and the glass walls that went from floor to ceiling. "Welcome to your new home, Luna," she said without enthusiasm, pointing with the glass to the panoramic view behind her, where the dark sea of the Puget Sound stretched into infinity, dotted only by the distant lights of ships and the reflection of the moon on the choppy water. I walked to the window, hypnotized, feeling a strange vertigo looking down and seeing the city reduced to shiny toys, realizing that the silence up there was absolute, hermetic. On my street, at that hour, I would hear dogs barking, televisions on, and motorcycles passing. But there, the only sound was my own accelerated breathing and the clinking of ice in Caroline's glass. It was a frightening luxury, a bubble of isolation that cost millions, and I felt like an intruder, a stain of imperfection in that architectural magazine setting. "This will be our stage for the next 12 months, Caroline continued, walking toward me and stopping at a safe distance, as if I could transmit some contagious disease. "The architect designed this apartment to be a refuge, but it ended up becoming a mausoleum, and now I need you to bring a little life here. But not too much, just enough to convince the visitors." She gestured to the hallway on the left, where solid wood doors lined up like sentinels, indicating the territorial division of that forced coexistence. "That hallway leads to the master suite, which is my space, and I value my privacy greatly, so rule number 1 is never to enter there without being invited, unless the building is on fire." I nodded, squeezing the handle of the suitcase until my fingers turned white, feeling the weight of those invisible rules settle on my shoulders. "Your room is in the other wing, the old guest room I had redecorated," she said, turning and starting to walk, expecting me to follow her like an obedient puppy. The sound of my steps on the marble seemed profane in that temple of silence, and I tried to tread lightly, diminishing my physical presence as much as possible. When she opened the door to my room, I lost my breath. It was a space larger than the entire apartment where I lived with my mother before she passed away, with a king-size bed covered in linen sheets that looked like clouds, and a private balcony facing the city skyline. The walk-in closet is already stocked with the basic wardrobe my personal stylist selected, clothes that befit an executive's fiancé, nothing too extravagant, but with the right label so we don't embarrass ourselves, Caroline explained, opening the closet doors and revealing rows of dresses, silk shirts, and tailored trousers in pastel tones. I looked at my battered suitcase, containing my band t-shirts and worn jeans, and felt a pang of humiliation, realizing that Luna, the person, was being systematically erased to make way for Luna, the character. "All of this is yours to use while the contract is valid. But remember, Luna, this is a costume. Don't get attached to any of this, just as you shouldn't get attached to me." The sentence hung in the air, heavy and sharp, and I looked at her, trying to find some trace of humanity in those brown eyes that analyzed me with coldness. "I understand the rules, Caroline," I replied, my voice coming out firmer than I expected, perhaps fueled by a drop of wounded pride that still remained. "I am here for the money and college, not to live a fairy tale with someone who sees me as a high-risk investment." She seemed surprised by my frankness, raising a perfectly drawn eyebrow, and for a second, the corner of her mouth twitched into something that could be a smile of approval. "Great, so we are on the same page, business above all." She walked away toward the door but stopped with her hand on the doorknob, without turning to me, her rigid posture denouncing attention she tried to hide at all costs. "Dinner will be served at 8 o'clock in the evening by the housekeeper, Martha, who comes every day in the morning and evening, and she is the first person we need to convince. So from now on, call me Carol when we are in front of anyone else." "Carol," I repeated, testing the nickname on my tongue, feeling how it sounded intimate and false at the same time. A bought and scripted intimacy. She left without saying anything else, closing the door softly and leaving me alone in that luxury hotel room that I now had to call home. I went to the balcony and opened the glass door, letting the damp and salty night wind enter, bringing with it the distant and muffled sound of waves hitting the pier down below. I rested my hands on the cold railing and looked at the dark abyss of the ocean, feeling an overwhelming loneliness hit me with the force of a high tide. I was surrounded by wealth, sleeping in sheets of Egyptian thread, with all my debts paid, but I never felt as poor in spirit as in that moment. The silence of that apartment wasn't peace. It was absence. The absence of warmth, of laughter, of real life. And I wondered if I could survive 12 months in that glass aquarium without suffocating. I opened my suitcase on the floor, next to the giant bed, and took out my mother's portrait. The only thing I really insisted on having there with me, placing it on the lacquered bedside table. Her smile in the photo seemed to judge me and welcome me at the same time, and I touched the cold glass, whispering a promise that this would be worth it, that I would leave there with my degree and my life back. But as I lay in that immense bed, smelling the expensive lavender scent of the pillow, I couldn't help thinking about the woman across the hall, drinking wine alone in her ivory tower, and I wondered what kind of monsters inhabited her silence so that she needed to buy company. Sleep was slow to come, and when it came, it was restless, populated by dreams where I fell from that balcony straight into the dark sea. And no one, not even Caroline, extended a hand to hold me. I woke up the next morning not with the alarm of my old cell phone, but with the muffled sound of voices and movement in the hallway, as if an army were setting up camp outside my door. When I left the room, still dizzy with sleep and wearing my worn cotton pajamas, I ran into 3 chrome clothing racks blocking the passage to the living room, loaded with pieces that exuded that unmistakable smell of a luxury shopping mall store. A thin and agitated woman, dressed in black from head to toe, was organizing shoes in military rows on the marble floor, while Caroline supervised everything sitting in an armchair, holding a tablet and a cup of coffee, already dressed impeccably as if she were ready to fire someone. "Good morning, Cinderella," Caroline said without taking her eyes off the screen, her tone loaded with a light irony that made me pull the collar of my t-shirt up, trying to hide my morning vulnerability. "We have 4 hours to transform you into someone who looks like they have frequented high society since the cradle, so I suggest you have a quick coffee and start working." The woman in black pushed a pile of hangers at me before I could protest or wash my face, and I saw myself transformed into a dress-up doll in real time, being pinned, measured, and judged by critical eyes that evaluated every inch of my body, as if it were a plot of land to be built on. The following hours were a blur of silk, linen, and cashmere, fabrics I had never touched in my life, and that now glided over my skin with an almost obscene softness. I tried on tailored trousers that cost more than a year of rent for my old studio apartment, silk blouses that seemed made of smoke, and straight-cut dresses that forced me to maintain a posture I didn't have. With every change of clothes, I came out of the improvised closet and stopped in front of Caroline, who barely lifted her head, making quick gestures with her hand to the right or left, approving or discarding the pieces with the cold efficiency of someone choosing tiles for a construction site. I felt less and less like myself, as if with every expensive piece of clothing I wore, a layer of the real Luna was peeled off and thrown away, replaced by that polished and artificial version the contract required. My feet hurt from trying on high and thin heels, and my smile was already frozen from so much nervousness. But Caroline seemed tireless, seeking a perfection I didn't know if I could deliver. It was only when the stylist handed me a long navy blue velvet dress, with a deep neckline in the back, and a discreet side slit, that the dynamic in the room changed, and the air suddenly became heavier and thinner. I entered the fitting room and slid the heavy fabric over my body. feeling how it embraced my curves with a possessive intimacy, molding to my waist and falling to my feet like a nocturnal waterfall. When I came out and walked to the center of the room, the noise of conversation ceased, and the silence that settled was different, charged with an electric tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Caroline lowered the tablet slowly, her eyes traveling up my body from bottom to top, lingering on the slit of the leg, rising up the marked waist, and stopping on my face with an undecipherable expression. Her lips slightly parted. She stood up from the armchair, a fluid and predatory movement, and walked toward me, the sound of her heels echoing like heartbeats on the hard floor. I held my breath, motionless, feeling exposed under that scrutiny that seemed to burn my skin through the velvet, not knowing if she was going to criticize me or kick me out. She stopped behind me, so close I could feel the heat of her body radiating against my bare back. And I saw our reflections in the large wall mirror, two contrasting figures united by an expensive lie. "The zipper didn't go up all the way," she murmured, her husky voice sounding dangerously close to my ear, and I felt the cold touch of her fingers on my hot skin, pulling the fastener with a torturous slowness. A violent shiver ran down my spine, and I closed my eyes for a second, fighting against the physical reaction that casual touch provoked, hating how my body betrayed my rational mind. She smoothed the fabric over my shoulders, her hands lingering a second longer than necessary, a touch that could be of possession or approval, but that sent an electric current straight to my womb. I opened my eyes and faced her reflection staring at me through the mirror, and for an instant, I saw something shine in the depths of those brown eyes, a hunger or curiosity that she quickly masked with her habitual coldness. "It is perfect for the engagement dinner," she said, moving away abruptly as if she had touched a live wire, returning to assume her general's posture. "This dress sends the right message. Elegance, mystery, and class. Exactly what we need to shut my Aunt Claudia's mouth." The stylist clapped, breaking the spell, and started chattering about accessories and shoes. But I barely heard, still feeling the ghost of Caroline's hands on my back. I went back to the fitting room to take off the dress, and when I saw myself alone before the smaller mirror, I stared at the woman looking back, made up, dressed like a queen, but with the frightened eyes of a lost girl. That wasn't the Luna who counted coins to buy bread. That was Mrs. Alcantara, a fictional character who was about to swallow my real identity. I felt a wave of dizziness, an imposter syndrome so strong that I needed to lean on the wall so as not to fall. Realizing that the danger of that contract wasn't just being discovered, but forgetting who I was. I took off the dress carefully, treating it as if it were made of glass, and put on my old clothes again, but they seemed strange now, rough and tight in the wrong places. When I went out to the living room, the racks were already being taken away, and Caroline was on the phone, speaking in German with some supplier, without even looking at me, as if the moment of tension between us had never existed. I gathered my things and went to my room, feeling exhausted as if I had run a marathon, and threw myself on the bed, looking at the high white ceiling. The wardrobe was now full of clothes that weren't mine, of a life that didn't belong to me, and I knew that from that night on, I would have to act without a script, improvising on a stage where any mistake could cost my future. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the smell of my old neighborhood, the sound of rain on the zinc roof, trying to anchor myself in reality. But the only thing my mind could evoke was the cold touch of Caroline's fingers on my skin, and the smell of white flowers that now impregnated even my thoughts. The ballroom of the most luxurious hotel in Seattle looked like a giant jewelry box, with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling like drops of frozen light, and waiters gliding through the room with silver trays, serving champagne to the elite of the construction industry. I felt like an imposter inside that blue velvet dress, squeezing the crystal glass so hard I was afraid of breaking it, while trying to maintain the frozen smile I rehearsed in the mirror for hours. Caroline was by my side, her hand resting on the lower part of my back, a touch that was supposed to be possessive for the audience, but that I felt burning through the fabric like a branding iron. She chatted with German investors in fluent English, and I just nodded, pretending to understand the complexity of the real estate market, praying that no one would ask me anything deeper than "How are you?" With every group we greeted, I felt the evaluating gazes, women covered in diamonds scanning me from top to bottom, trying to calculate the price of my dress and the origin of my last name, not knowing that my only asset was the debt Caroline was paying. I was the new shiny accessory of the heiress, and the murmur that followed us was as audible as the soft classical music playing in the background. Caroline seemed immune to it all, moving through the hall with the confidence of a shark in familiar waters. But I noticed the tension in her jaw every time someone asked about the wedding date, and she squeezed my waist a little tighter, as if using me as an anchor not to explode. It was when we approached the bar that the fragile charm of the night broke, materialized in the figure of Robert, one of the direct competitors of the firm, and, from what I knew of office gossip, an old enemy of Caroline's father. He was a corpulent man, with the red face of someone who had drunk too much whiskey, and smiled when he saw us with a malice that made my stomach turn. "Caroline, always a vision," he said with a slurry voice, ignoring her extended hand and focusing his bloodshot eyes directly on my neckline. "And I see you finally decided to bring one of your toys out for a walk in public. Very pretty, I must admit. But I hope she knows how to do something besides spending your money." Silence fell over the small circle of people around us, and I felt the blood drain from my face, the humiliation hitting me like a physical punch, reducing me again to the poor girl who didn't belong in that world. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend my honor, but the words died in my throat, suffocated by the fear of ruining the contract, of embarrassing Caroline, of being exactly what he said I was. I lowered my eyes, feeling hot tears of shame prickling, ready to accept the insult and retreat, as I had always done every time someone with money decided to step on me. But Caroline did not retreat. On the contrary, she took a step forward, placing herself physically between me and him, blocking his view with a posture that exuded a cold and controlled fury. "Luna is not a toy, Robert, and much less a decorative accessory like the women you usually rent for these events," she said, and her voice didn't alter a decibel, but it had the hardness of tempered steel. "She is a brilliant architecture student, with a worldview and integrity that you couldn't buy even if you sold your entire mediocre company." The man's smile faltered, and I raised my head, stunned, looking at Caroline straight back, not believing what I was hearing. She continued, without giving him a chance to breathe, every word calculated to destroy his ego in front of all the industry peers. "And I suggest you measure your words when speaking of my future wife, because if I hear one more disrespectful comment coming from your mouth, or from anyone else in this room, I guarantee I will turn your professional life into a hell so big that you will beg to go back to being irrelevant." She sustained his gaze for 5 interminable seconds, until he looked away, murmuring a lame excuse and walking away like a kicked dog, taking with him the aura of arrogance that surrounded him. Caroline turned to me immediately, ignoring the shocked whispers around, and her eyes swept my face with a genuine concern I had never seen in her. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly, and for the first time, her hand on my waist didn't feel like an act, but a support, a safe harbor in the middle of the storm. I nodded, unable to speak, feeling my heart beat so hard it seemed to want to come out of my mouth, not from the fright, but from the overwhelming revelation that, for the first time in my life, Someone had fought for me. She hadn't defended me just as a business deal. There was something personal in her voice, a protective anger that transcended the clauses of our contract. "Let's go. We've already done the necessary socializing, and the smell of hypocrisy here is making me sick," she said, interlacing our fingers for real this time, palm against palm, an intimate gesture that sent an electric current straight to my chest. While we walked to the exit, leaving behind the shocked ballroom, I squeezed her hand back, feeling the discreet callus on the palm of the hand of someone who also visited construction sites, and realized that the ice woman could be incredibly hot when she wanted to protect what was hers. We entered the private elevator in silence, but the air between us had changed. It was no longer the cold vacuum of forced coexistence, but a space charged with a confused gratitude and an admiration that I began to fear, because I knew it was the first step to falling madly in love with her. Caroline's car slid through the stone entrance of her parents' mansion like a hearse arriving at a wake, silent and solemn. The house was an imposing colonial construction, surrounded by millimetrically pruned gardens that seemed to scream that there was no room for errors or weeds there. My hands were sweating cold on the velvet fabric of the dress, and I felt Caroline take a deep breath beside me, a trembling inhalation that betrayed that, before those iron gates, the powerful executive went back to being just a daughter trying to please an impossible father. She turned off the engine but made no move to get out, turning to me in the gloom of the vehicle with a pleading look. "Remember, Luna, inside there, we are the most passionate couple in the world. No matter what they say or how poisonous they are, you do not let go of my hand." The dining room looked like a courtroom, with a dark wood table so long that I needed to almost shout to be heard by whoever was at the other end. Caroline's father, a gentleman with white hair and a severe look, sat at the head like a judge, while her mother, a small and nervous woman, seemed to try to disappear into her own chair. And there was Aunt Claudia, the unofficial matriarch of family gossip, who analyzed me with an imaginary monocle, looking for any flaw in my posture or accent that denounced my humble origin. Dinner was an exercise in psychological torture, with invasive questions about my family, my studies, and my intentions, disguised as polite curiosity, but loaded with contempt. Caroline answered most of the questions for me, weaving a web of elegant lies about how we met at an art gallery and how our connection was spiritual and immediate. I just smiled and agreed, focused on not using the wrong fork to eat the fish, feeling Caroline's leg touching mine under the table, a constant contact that served both to calm me down and keep me alert. But the tension exploded when dessert was served, and Aunt Claudia, after drinking her third glass of wine, decided that our performance wasn't convincing enough for her standards. "It's all very pretty on paper, Caroline," she said, putting down the silver spoon with a sharp clink. "But I don't see fire. I don't see that sparkle in the eyes that lovers have. You look like two partners closing a contract, not two women about to get married." The silence that followed was absolute, and I saw Caroline's father nod slightly, agreeing with the cruel assessment. My heart raced, and I felt Caroline's panic beside me, the fear that the whole plan would crumble right there, for lack of public chemistry. It was instinct, or perhaps desperation, that made me turn to her in that moment, seeking her eyes. Caroline didn't hesitate. With a fluid movement, she turned in her chair, facing me, and held my face with both hands, her cold fingers touching my hot cheeks with a firmness that immobilized me. "If it's proof you want, Aunt," she said, her voice low and husky, focused only on my mouth, "then watch closely." Before I could breathe or process what was happening, she leaned her body in and pressed her lips to mine. It was supposed to be a technical kiss, a performance to shut the audience up, a dry touch of closed lips, as was in the unspoken rules of our agreement. But that is not what happened. The moment our mouths met, something broke in the ordered universe she had built. I felt the softness of her lips, the taste of red wine and contained breath. And suddenly, there was no more dining room, no family, no contract. An electric shock, real and physical, ran through my body, leaving my lips and going down to the tips of my toes, making my womb contract in a violent and unexpected response. I heard a low sigh escape her throat, a vibration I felt against my own mouth, and instinctively my hands went up to her shoulders, pulling her closer, deepening the contact. For 2 seconds, the kiss stopped being theater and turned into hunger. Caroline parted her lips, and the tip of her tongue brushed mine, a shy and terrifying invitation that transformed the scene into something forbidden and sacred. The heat radiated between us, a bonfire lighting up in the middle of that frozen room, and I forgot who I was, forgot that this was a lie. I just wanted to stay there, in that embrace, feeling her perfume envelop me and her taste fill me. We pulled away abruptly, as if we had been burned, both with uneven breathing and wide eyes, shock stamped on our faces. I looked at Caroline and saw her pupils dilated, the blush rising up her pale neck, and the absolute confusion of someone who just lost control of their own script. The table was silent, but this time it was a stunned silence. Aunt Claudia had her mouth open, and Caroline's father cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the raw intensity of what he had just witnessed. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I think that ends the discussion about the lack of passion." The rest of the night was a blur. We said goodbye in a hurry, fleeing that house as if we had stolen something valuable. We got into the car, and Caroline took off with tires screeching on the wet asphalt, driving too fast through the curves of the dark road. The silence inside the vehicle was dense, suffocating, charged with the static electricity of that kiss that still tingled on my lips. I looked at the rain hitting the glass, without the courage to look to the side, feeling my body vibrate with an adrenaline that wouldn't pass. Caroline held the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white, her jaw locked, looking fixedly at the road. Neither of us dared to speak, because speaking would mean recognizing what had happened, would mean admitting that the main rule had been broken not out of obligation, but out of instinct. I touched my lips with my fingertips, still feeling the texture of her mouth, and a terrible fear settled in my chest. The fear that, for me, that hadn't been just acting. And by the way Caroline drove, fleeing her own house and her own feelings, I suspected that, for her, it hadn't been either. The private elevator opened into the penthouse with a soft hiss, and we both entered the apartment like opposing hurricanes, carrying inside the electrical storm that had started at that dinner. Caroline threw her designer bag onto a leather armchair with a violence I didn't know in her, and began pacing from one side to the other in the wide living room, her heels clicking on the marble in a frantic rhythm. I stood near the door, feeling my body shake all over, a mixture of adrenaline, fear, and a residual desire that made my legs feel like they were made of jelly. I needed water. I needed to put out the fire that kiss had lit. So I walked toward the kitchen, trying to keep a safe distance from the woman who seemed about to explode. "You lost your mind," I blurted out, unable to contain the words that were stuck in my throat since the car, my voice coming out trembling in the silence of the house. "Back there at your parents' house, in front of your family. You didn't need to go that far, Caroline. It wasn't in the contract, and it certainly wasn't in the script we agreed on." She stopped walking abruptly and turned to me, her eyes flashing with a frightening intensity, and walked toward me with long strides, invading my personal space until she cornered me against the cold island counter of the kitchen. "I did what was necessary to save the deal," she hissed, leaning both hands on the marble stone beside my hips, trapping me in a cage made by her arms. "If I hadn't kissed you like that, Aunt Claudia would have left there and called half the board of directors saying our engagement was a farce, and you would be back at the supermarket register tomorrow morning. Her smell, a mixture of expensive perfume and the rain we caught on the way, invaded my senses, and I had to tilt my head back to face her, feeling the heat of her body radiating against my velvet dress. It wasn't just business, I retorted in a whisper, challenging the lie she tried to tell herself, seeing her pupils dilate upon hearing the naked, raw truth. I felt it, Caroline, and you felt it too. We weren't acting when you put your tongue in my mouth, and you know it. The silence that fell between us was heavy, charged with an unbearable sexual tension that seemed to make the air thin. She opened her mouth to deny it, to call me delusional, but her gaze fell to my lips, and the mask of coldness she used as a shield shattered into 1,000 pieces. I don't know who moved first, whether it was me who pulled the lapel of her blazer, or if it was her who advanced. But in the next second, we were kissing again, and this time, there was no audience. There was no pretense, only a desperate hunger that had been repressed by weeks of polite coexistence. Caroline lifted me by the waist with surprising strength and sat me on the cold kitchen counter, standing between my legs, and I interlaced my fingers in her hair, pulling her closer, wanting to merge our bodies until there was no space left for doubts. The kiss was urgent, hot, and wet, a clash of tongues and teeth that tasted of wine and desperation. Her hands roamed my back, going down the zipper of the dress, and I felt her cold fingers touch the bare skin of my waist, causing a violent shiver that made me gasp against her mouth. I moaned her name, a low and hoarse sound that echoed in the empty kitchen, and I felt her body tense against mine, her heart beating as fast as mine, beating against my chest like a war drum. For a glorious and terrifying moment, I thought she was going to give in, that we were going to break all the rules right there, in that luxury kitchen, and let desire defeat reason. But then, as quickly as it started, she stopped. Caroline pulled away abruptly, as if she had woken up from a trance, stumbling back with panting breath and swollen red lips. She brought her hand to her mouth, horrified, looking at me sitting on the counter with my dress crumpled and my hair messy. And I saw panic take over her eyes, replacing desire. "No," she whispered, her voice failing and full of fear, shaking her head frantically. "This cannot happen, Luna. This is a mistake, a terrible mistake." "Caroline," I tried to say, getting down from the counter with trembling legs, wanting to reach her, wanting to say it wasn't a mistake, that it was the only real thing in that whole farce. But she raised her hand in a stop sign, erecting again that insurmountable wall of ice between us. "Go to your room," she ordered, and this time her voice was that of the boss, cold and distant, although I could see the tremor in her hands. "Forget this happened. Forget this night. We have a contract, and I won't allow cheap feelings to ruin the empire my family built." She turned and left the kitchen almost running, and seconds later, I heard the door of her suite slam shut and the lock turn, a definitive sound that ended any possibility of dialogue. I stayed alone in the gloom of the kitchen, feeling the cold of the marble still on my thighs, and her taste in my mouth, tears of frustration and thwarted desire starting to burn my eyes. I had tasted the fire that existed inside Caroline, but she had preferred to lock herself in the ice, and I knew that, starting the next morning, I would pay dearly for making her lose control. I woke up with a moral hangover that weighed more than any drunkenness, my head throbbing with the vivid memory of Caroline's smell and the brutal rejection that followed. Sunlight entered through the crack in my bedroom curtain like a blade, wounding my eyes swollen from crying, and for a long moment, I wished I could stay there curled up forever. avoiding the inevitable confrontation waiting for me on the other side of the door. But the contract didn't provide days off for broken hearts. So I got up, put on simple clothes, and walked down the silent hallway, feeling every step as if I were marching to the scaffold. The kitchen was impeccable, with no trace of our near surrender the night before, except for the ghost of my desire that seemed to hover over the cold marble counter. Caroline was already there, sitting at the table with her tablet and a cup of black coffee, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked like impenetrable armor. She didn't look up when I entered, her fingers running across the screen with mechanical agility, and the air around her seemed to have dropped 10 degrees. "Good morning," I murmured, my voice coming out hoarse and uncertain, waiting for any reaction, a look, an apology, or even an argument. But she just turned the digital page of the newspaper and replied with a monotone that froze me to the bone. "Today's task list is on the counter, Luna. You have an appointment at the dermatologist, and then you need to go to the notary's office to sign the civil union papers. The driver will take you." I froze, looking at her straight back, incredulous at the capacity she had to erase reality. "Caroline," I tried, taking a step toward the table, ignoring the lump in my throat. "We need to talk about last night, about what happened in this kitchen." She finally raised her head, and the look she gave me was so empty and distant that it seemed she was looking at a white wall, not at the woman she almost undressed hours before. "Nothing happened last night, Luna," she said with a lethal calm, except a moment of weakness caused by stress and alcohol, a mistake that has already been corrected and won't be repeated. The word mistake hit me like a slap, and I felt anger rise, mixed with a sharp pain of rejection. "It didn't feel like a mistake when you were moaning my name," I retorted, wanting to hurt her, wanting to break that ice mask and find the passionate woman I had seen for a brief second. Caroline stood up abruptly, the chair dragging on the floor with a sharp squeak, and grabbed her bag, avoiding looking directly into my eyes, as if she feared what she might find there. "We have a professional agreement, and I suggest you remember the reason you are here. To pay your debts and guarantee your future, not to play house or feed adolescent romantic fantasies." She passed by me, leaving a trail of cold perfume, without even touching me, maintaining a surgical distance, and left through the front door without saying goodbye, leaving only the sound of the elevator going down to mark her escape. I stayed alone in the immense kitchen, holding the task list as if it were a sentence, feeling more like an employee than ever, a disposable piece in the gear of her perfect life. The days that followed were a slow and silent torture, a cold war fought inside a luxury penthouse. Caroline became a ghost, leaving before I woke up and returning when I was already locked in my room, communicating only by notes left on the fridge or short, impersonal messages on the cell phone. At social events, the torture was even worse, because she went back to being the perfect fiancé. She held my hand, smiled for the cameras, and put her arm around my waist with a convincing possessiveness. But as soon as we got into the car or the elevator, she let go of me as if I burned. Returning to her world of silence and insurmountable barriers, I began to feel invisible. A doll that was taken out of the box to play, and then put away on the dark shelf. And this invisibility hurt more than the poverty I faced before, because now I knew what I was losing. I watched her from a distance, when she thought she was alone on the balcony looking at the sea, and saw the deep sadness in her shoulders, the exhaustion of maintaining that iron facade all the time. And it was in that painful observation, amidst her contempt, that the cruelest truth hit me. I wasn't just hurt by being rejected. I was hurt because I had fallen in love with her. I fell in love with the woman who defended me at the party, with the woman who trembled in my arms in the kitchen, and even with the frightened woman fleeing from me now. That night, a week after the kiss, I was lying in my bed listening to the wind howl outside, announcing a storm coming from the ocean. The sky was black and heavy, charged with electricity, perfectly mirroring the climate inside that apartment. I didn't know how much longer I could stand that ice without breaking, but I knew something was about to change. Because nature, just like repressed feelings, cannot be contained forever. I heard the front door open late at night, heavy and dragging steps in the hallway, and I knew the storm had finally arrived to collect its dues. This approaching storm would bring not only rain, but the turning point that would define if our contract would be destroyed or transformed into something eternal. The outcome of this intense story continues in part 2, coming out soon.